Kakadosh Boker Tov, Mesechet Yevamot of Lamed Amud Aleph 35a1. We're going to finish this chapter, the third chapter. Okay, it says over here like this: which means that even though a ktana, which is a minor, she is not fitting to give birth, and therefore, right, there's no reason to make her that she should have to wait for 3 months. Remember, the 3 months is for havchana. Havchana means that we have to want to distinguish from who is the child, right? Or does she have a child? So he says, still, they made a gezerah that they had to wait for 3 months because of the gedolah. So ask the Gemara, Umi gazrina, and do we make such a gezerah? Yeah, or are we going to make a gezerah ktana mishum gedolah, a ktana because of a gedolah? But now we learned in the Mishnah, mayu ktanot she'enan ruyot leled, machzirin otam miyad. If right now the women were ktanot, meaning the wives, and they were switched, so they cannot give birth, we give them to give them back to their husbands immediately. So what are you talking about that we make a gezerah ktana mishum gedolah? So Amar Gidal Amar Rav says Gidal Amar Rav horat shah haita. No, that Mishnah was a horat shah, but not halacha ledorot. Horat shah means it was a psak for that hour, for that moment, but it wasn't for generations. And that's what you're going to do. So you're right. At that moment, that's what they made that decree. But really, be'emet, right? You would always have to wait for the 3 months. So says the Gemara, Miklal Davai. Are you going to tell me that this actual story happened, right? That this was not just stam like this story actually happened about the 2 brothers getting married to 2 sisters, and then they came and they swapped wives. That actually happened. Ela, but rather kehora'at shahayta. It was like hora'at shah, chiluf lo shchiach. But switching of wives is not common. And since switching of wives is not common, that's why he's coming and he's saying, right, that they didn't make such a decree. Lishna acharina, another lashon in the Gemara, Amrila. Amar Shemuel says, Shemuel. Yeah, he comes and he says like this. Yeah. Kulan sichot le'amtin shosha chodashim. Everybody always has to wait 3 months, except for a gioret and a shivcha. Right? A gioret that a gioret gdola, and a shivcha, right? A shivcha meshuchret gdola. Says the Gemara, aval ktana bat Yisrael, para ktana bat Yisrael, ena tzicha lamtin shosha chodashim. She doesn't have to. So according to this, even a ktana bat Yisrael does not have to wait for 3 months. B'mai, what are we talking about? If we're talking about that this ktana dir miyun, hamra Shmuel chadazimna. Shmuel already said it once, so why do you have to say it again? Get, if she came out with a get, hakam Shmuel baya, right? Shmuel says, what are you talking about? That a ktana needs, right? She needs the waiting of the 3 months. The Amar Shmuel, but Shmuel says, she does miyun, you do not have to wait for 3 months. Get, if she was given a get, you do need to wait 3 months. But rather, biznut. We were talking about the ktana, she had znut. Okay, and therefore he's saying that even a ktana bat Yisrael does not need to wait 3 months because of znut. Uznut bektana lo shia, but it's not common. Meaning to have znut, that a ktana comes, a minor comes, and she starts having relations, it's not common. So because it's not common, that's why they didn't obligate the 3 months. So says the Gemara, ki yoretun shuchreret dishkiach beznut ligzor. Says 1 second. But by a gioret, she's a goya, or by a shivcha kenanit, right? The shvachot, they were always shtufei zima, they were always with immorality. So he says you should make a decree, right? Why? In order to know about if it was a kosher child or not kosher child. Meaning, was this child when she was still a goya, or when she was already converted? Was the child when she was still a shivcha, right, a maid servant, or when she was already freed? So says the Gemara, Ude'amar keRabbi Yosef, he holds like Rabbi Yosef. Titania was learned in the Braita, Hagioret v'ashivuya v'ashivcha shenimtu shenimkum shenimtu. When you have a case of a gioret, right, or a shivuya, right, or a shivcha. So gioret is a convert, right, a woman that she was a guya and then she converted. Shivuya is a captive, right, that she was taken into captivity, or a shivcha, that they were redeemed, or they converted, or they were let free. Obviously, each one in their place. The review that comes says you have to wait 3 months. Rabbi Yosef matir liares l'naseh miyad. Rabbi Yosef says no. You let them, even if they're gudolot, they could get married immediately. There's no problem. So Amar Rabba says, my time Rabbi Yosef. What's the reason Rabbi Yosef? Kasav arisha mezana meshemeshe b'moch kedei shelo titaber. He says that if a woman already is going to have znut, she's going to use a contraceptive. Why? She doesn't want to become pregnant. Yeah, so because of that, she could immediately come and get married. Why? We're not going to suspect that she's going to be pregnant. She's for sure going to use some measures to make sure that she has no problems. Okay? So Amalei Abaye says, Bishlama Gioret, I understand the Giora because she wants to convert. So Minatra Nasha, she's going to watch over herself that she doesn't want to become pregnant, right? So therefore, she's going to prepare a moch. She's going to prepare a contraceptive in order to differentiate between a zera which is done shelo b'kedusha and b'kedusha, right? Shevuya v'shivcha nami, also a captive or a maidservant, tishameh mimarayu menatre nashayu, that she's going to come and hear from the master, right? That she's going to become freed or let out, liberated, and therefore she's going to watch over herself. But if you have a woman that she's going out with shen va'ayin, which means remember that if a person comes and they knock out an eye or a tooth of their slave, doesn't matter if it's a male slave or a female slave, but here we're talking about a female slave, right? They go out free. So it says over here, so therefore how's she going to watch over herself? She doesn't know that she's going to become free. So she doesn't know she's going to become free. She's not going to come and care whether she became pregnant or not. Why? Because even if she doesn't become pregnant, what's the big deal? Okay, fine. So she has a child for the master. So what's the big deal? Right? So how is she going to watch over herself? The Chitema, if you're going to tell me, yeah, call the mimela, right? Any case of a relations when it's going to be that it wasn't known from the beginning. So Modeh Rabbi Yosef says that she doesn't have to wait 3 months. At Tanya, we learned to the Braita, according to Rabbi Yehuda, a woman that's violated or seduced has to wait 3 months. Rabbi Yosef again, Rabbi Yosef says she gets married immediately. She doesn't have to wait for 3 months. So what's going on? Here, if a woman's violated or seduced, she doesn't know what's going on. So for how could it be that she does not have to wait for the 3 months? So answers the Gemara, you're right. But rather Abaye says, she doesn't even have to prepare herself a contraceptive. You know what she does? Immediately after the relations, she turns over. Now, when she turns over, right, that's going to come and cause that she will not become pregnant. So therefore, a woman that she's going to be mizanah, she's going to have relations in this way. And then afterwards she turns over because, right, she gets up right away and she's going to, make sure that she doesn't become pregnant. So therefore he comes over here and he says, right, there's no need for preparing, right, contraceptive. So says the Gemara, one second. So says the Gemara, ve'idach, now the other Tana, chashinan shemalo nitabcha yafa yafa. He says we're not going to suspect that she's not going to turn over properly in order that all the zera actually falls. Yeah. What happens is that we know that in order for a woman to become pregnant, right, she usually would stay in bed and she's not going to get up, because if she gets up, all the zera falls out. So now what happens is she's purposely coming and turning over and trying to get all the zera out of her, right, all the semen out of her, so she's not going to become pregnant. But according to Shittat Yehuda, we're going to suspect that she doesn't do it properly. There's still going to be a little bit of zera that's going to stay inside. And remember, all a woman needs is one drop of zera to stay inside for her to become pregnant. And therefore, according to him, you still need the 3 months. So now says the Gemara, V'imayu kohanot. If you remember, we mentioned that if they were kohanot, which means the daughters of kohanim, they become pasul for kohanim. Kohanot in Israelit lo. Says what? Only a kohen, yes, but a Israelite, no? Well, why? Because at the end of the day, if they're the wives of kohanim, they're always prohibited to their husbands. Remember, the kohen is the one that even if his wife is violated, she's still prohibited to the kohen. You understand? It's only by Israel that you have such a leniency. So answers the Gemara, we could say if they were the wives of kohanim, they become pasul for the kehuna. So says the Gemara, neshe kohanim in neshe Yisraelim lo. Only the wives of kohanim, yes, the wives of Yisraelim, no. The Amar Rav Amram says Rav Amram, Hamin ta'amalan Rav Sheshat. Rav Sheshat came and he said this. And we went and we showed him, right, we were, our eyes were lightened from our Mishnah. Eshet Yisrael shenenza, af al pi shemuter leba'ala psula lekehuna. When you have a woman that she is an Eshet Yisrael, she's violated, even though she's permitted to the husband. So remember, it's an Eshet Yisrael and it was done in violation. So she's permitted to the husband. Still, she's psula lekehuna. She becomes disqualified to the kiuna, which means that if the husband dies and now she's an almanah, she cannot get married to a kohen anymore. Why? Because she was violated. So Amar Rava says, Hachi Kamar, this is what it means, right? Mina keuna. Ima yu kohanot shenusuot in Israel nifselu mina truma devenishayhu. So they are going to be prohibited, right, for eating of the truma of their father's houses, which means that even if, right, this kohenet was married to a Jew, a regular Jew, okay, Israel, and now what happens is the husband dies. Usually she goes back to her father's house. Here, if the husband dies and she doesn't have any children, she does not go back to the father's house. She actually loses out on all the truma because she was violated. Hadran alach arba'a achim. We finished the chapter of the four brothers. You know, the four brothers with all the women. Okay. Next chapter 4, right? Perek Revi, the 4th chapter. Okay, Lamed He Amud Bet. Okay, we're talking about now a woman that her husband dies and she falls in front of the Yavam. So she's not allowed to do the Yibum, right, until after 90 days of the death of the husband. Because maybe Bemet, she or one of her tzarot, one of her co-wives, are pregnant. And therefore, it's going to be a Isur Veshetach when it's not a mitzvah. So because of that, right, she's a surah to the Yabam. So also she's not allowed to do Chalitza, if you remember. Because if you cannot do Yibum, you cannot do Chalitza. So therefore, what happens is that you have to wait for 3 months. So imagine a person dies, they don't right away take care of the Yibum or Chalitza. 3 months, you have to wait before doing Yibum or Chalitza. Now, what happens if he went and he did it within the 90 days? Okay? What happens if he did it within the 90 days? So this is our Mishnah. HaCholetz livamto v'nimtzet meuberet. Imagine right now, a person does Chalitza to his Yivamah. Okay, and then she's found to be pregnant. Yeah, so v'yalda, and she gives birth. Bizman shavlad shel kayama. If the child is going to be avlad shel kayama, which means it's not a nefel, so therefore the chalitza was for no reason whatsoever. Hu mutar bikrovoteha v'hi muteret bikrovav, right? V'lo pasla min hakeuna. So if the child was a viable child, a good child, so now all of a sudden he's allowed to get married to all of her family members. And she's allowed to get married to all of his family members, right? Why? Because if you remember, we already mentioned that if a person does chalitza, so now he's not allowed to get married now to any of her family members. Remember, what is chalitza? Is the brother-in-law. So the brother-in-law, now we're not talking about brothers with sisters. Forget about those in that case. One man married to his wife, right? He passes away without children. The brother comes and he does chalitza. Once he does chalitza to that woman, he's not allowed to get married to any of her family members. So whether it's to her sister or to, he did, no, because why? Once he does chalitza, that's it. Now what happens is, since the chalitza was not a viable chalitza, why? Because she had a child, and the child was from the brother, right? So therefore, all of a sudden, this man is allowed to get married to her sister, to her mother, to her daughter, to whoever, what the case was. Okay? Now the same halacha as her. She's now allowed to get married to all of his family members. Right? Why? Because now it comes out that she had a child. If she had a child, there's no problem, right? Not only that, it says over here, that in this case also, it says velo pasla min kiuna. She is not become sula from the kiuna. Remember, al almana is kosher to the kiuna. Right? Al almana is kosher to the kiuna. What's pasul to the kiuna? Right? We know it's going to be a grusha v'chalutza. So if she was a chalutza, she's prohibited to the Kohen Idiot, a regular Kohen. But now that she's almanah, because she didn't need the chalitza, it wasn't a good chalitza at all because she didn't need it. So therefore, she's permitted to the Kohen. Okay? En avlad shel kaima, but what happens if the child was a nefel? Which means that the child died, and therefore the woman was really needed the chalitza. So therefore, hu asu bikrovotea v'hi asu bikrovav u'pasla min hakehuna. So now everything goes what we mentioned before. She's prohibited in all of his family members. He's prohibited in all of her family members, and she becomes psula from the kiuna because it was a good chalitza. Again, even though it was within the 3 months. Next, hakones tivimto v'imsemu beret. What happens now if he actually got married to her? Okay, and what happens is that she's found to be pregnant. V'yalda, now she has a child. Izman shavlad shel kaima. Right? If right now the child is a good child, right, which means that she didn't need to do yibum, yotzi, he has to take her out with a get. And now they're both obligated korban chatat. Again, obviously we weren't talking about something that was done purposely. So therefore, it's only going to be a korban chatat. Right, shel kayma. But if the child is not avlad shel kayma, yekayem, he's allowed to come and to keep married to her. Another case, safek imu ben tisha la'ach harishon, right? Safek ben shiva la'ach hacharon, yotzi vavlad kasher, yechayvim b'asham talui. Which means like this: what happens now if she gave birth, but now you have a doubt? Was it 9 months from the first husband, or was it 7 months from the second husband? So we don't know, right? So therefore, yotzi, we come and he has to take her out, right? Why? Because of the safek. But the child is still going to be kasher, right? Obviously, the fact if the child came from the first husband, there's no problem that the mother had relations with the brother, because it doesn't have an effect on the child. So that's going to be number 2. And even if it's going to be from the second husband, the yibum was done properly. So therefore, the child is always going to be kasher. But both of them now are going to be chayav and hasham talui. What's an hasham talui? Remember, an hasham talui is a guilt offering, because obviously this was done purposely, but it wasn't done purposely for an avirah. It was done purposely the yibum. So it's not going to be like a chata. But here, it's a hasham talui because maybe there was an avirah done, or maybe there was not an avirah done. So since it's a maybe yes, maybe no, it's an hasham talui. It's a talui. It's depending whether the avirah was done or not, and therefore they bring an hasham talui. Says the Gemara, Itmar, it was stated, hacholetz lemeuberet v'ipila. Imagine right now somebody did chalitza to a woman that she's pregnant, and then he pila, and then she came and she had a miscarriage. Rabbi Yochanan says, she doesn't have to do another chalitza, because the first chalitza was a chalitza kshera, which means, even though technically speaking, you're going to say, listen, 1 second, she's pregnant. So for the chalitza, she's not going to be a chalitza. No, it all depends what's going to happen afterwards. What's going to happen with this child? Is she going to have a good child or not? So he says that Shakish Shamar, the Shakish says, tzricha chalitza min ha'achin. She does need chalitza from the brothers. Why? Because the chalitza rishona was not kosher. So basically, you have a machloket, Rabbi Yochanan and Shakish, does she need to do another chalitza or not? Rabbi Yochanan says, ena tzricha chalitza min ha'achin. She does not need chalitza from the brothers. Okay, that's Rabbi Yochanan. Why? Chalitza meuberet shma chalitza, because chalitza of a meuberet of a pregnant woman is still considered a chalitza kshera, and ubiyah meuberet shma biyah. And also the yibum of a woman that she's pregnant, right, is called a yibum, which means that what happens right now if he did yibum, and then they found out she was pregnant, and then she had a miscarriage, it's still considered a good yibum. Why? Because it came out that it was already mitbarer, it was already like acknowledged to us, it was being known to us that it was a good yibum. The Shaki says, no, tzricha chalitza min ha'achin, you need chalitza from the brothers. Chalitza meuberet lo shma chalitza, but chalitza meuberet is not considered a chalitza. Ubiyat meuberet lo shma biyah. And biyat meuberet is not considered a biyah as well. So b'may kami palgeh, what is the machloka between them? Ibaitei makra, ibaitei masvara. If you want, you could say it's a pasuk that they're arguing in, or in the svara, right, that they're arguing in. What does that mean exactly? He comes and he says, right, like this. Rabbi Yochanan savar, Rabbi Yochanan holds, Im yavo Eliyahu v'yomar, if Eliyahu Navi is going to come and tell us before the chalitza, that right now, that even though she's pregnant, she's going to have a miscarriage. So what? She doesn't need to do chalitza nibumi? But she doesn't have to do chalitza. For sure, she has to do chalitza nibumi. So Hashanami, so to here, it became known to us retroactively that she has to do yibum and chalitza. So what's the problem? The Shakish says, we don't say that we're looking retroactively. I mean, we have to say right now, what is she? She's pregnant. So you can't do chalitza to a pregnant woman. But right now, what is she? She's pregnant. You don't do yibum to a pregnant woman. So because of that, we don't say that it was known retroactively and so on. That's shitat Shakish. So that's mitzad sevara, logic. Now we're going to go to the pasuk. If you want, you could say it's a pasuk. The pasuk says, Rabbi Yochanan says, uben en lo. What does it mean that he doesn't have a child? Amar Rachmana. Right? He doesn't have a child now. So which means, according to Rabbi Yochanan, if she doesn't have a child, so then all the halachot of Yibum Chalitza apply. Right now, he doesn't have a child. The Shaki Savari says, no. Uben en lo ayen alav. Which means you have to check already from before whether Be'emet he has a child or not. And if he has a child, if the Chalitza and the Yibum is nothing. So to here, the fact that you have to actually ayen ubdok, if he has any type of a child or not, right, even if it's going to be an ubar, so therefore you're not going to do it. So Eitvei Rabbi Yochanan Shakish, Rabbi Yochanan comes and he asks on Shakish, right? What do we just say in our Mishnah? En avlat shel kayama. If the child is not a viable child, So therefore, she becomes psula from the kiuna. She's prohibited in his family members. He's prohibited in her family members. It's good according to me. The amina that I'm going to say chalitza me'ubedet shma chalitza that is considered a good chalitza shumachi pasla because that's why it's considered psula from kiuna and everything else. But according to you that you just said chalitza me'ubedet lo shma chalitza amay psula mina kiuna. At the end of the day, there was nothing done. There was no chalitza done according to you because the chalitza was not a good chalitza, but she was pregnant. You're right. At the end, the child died. Right? It was a miscarriage. But right now, it's not considered a good chalitza because according to you, there was nothing. Samalei, he comes and he answers him, midrabanan. No. Midoraita be'emet, she's still kosher for the kiuna. It's a din drabanan. Right? Ulechumra be'alman. It's just a chumrah. Just that way they should know, right? That because they didn't know that she was pregnant, and then they're going to come and going to permit her to do the kiuna. Ikadam. There was another gear sign, what we just said now. Eitvir Shakish Rabbi Yochanan, the opposite question. The Shakish was now asking Rabbi Yochanan. Right? He asked from the Mishnah, if the child was not a viable child, he's prohibited in her family members also and she's prohibited in his family members. And she's going to be psula through the kiuna. It's good according to me that I'm going to say that it's not considered a chalitza. And that's why we taught salamina kiuna that she's going to be psula mina kiuna lechumra velo ktani, and we didn't say enat tzricha chalitza mina achim, that she doesn't need to do chalitza from the brothers. But according to you, right, that you're going to say that chalitza me'uberet is the chalitza kshera, enat tzricha chalitza mina achim bale. Why didn't it say mefurash in the Mishnah that you didn't need to do another chalitza from the brothers? Right? According to me, it makes sense because she does. And according to you, you should have just said she doesn't need to do another chalitza. So Amalei, Rav Yochanan is going to answer to the Shakish, Enachenam, you're right. She does not need chalitza from the brothers. But since we saw in the Reisha where it says Lo Pasla that she wasn't psula from the kiuna, so Tananam Nami Seifa, we also learned in the Seifa psula mina kiuna, right? And we didn't mention the concept of the chalitza from the brothers that she still needs to do, right? The chalitza or not from the brothers. Okay, so Eitve Rav Yochanan Shakish, Rav Yochanan comes and he asks from Shakish, En avlad shel kayama, if the child was not a viable child, you could stay married to her. It's good according to me that I'm going to say the chalitza me'uberet is considered a chalitza, and the bi'ava of yavam is considered, right? Of yavam to a me'uberet is considered a bi'ah. Shumachtane, that's why we say yikayem, leave her married, right? Why? You don't have to do anything else now because he already did it in the past. But according to you, Marta, chalitza me'uberet, it's not considered a good chalitza, and the bi'ah me'uberet is not considered a good bi'ah. Yachzor v'yivol. You have to do a new bi'ah. You have to have a new relations to do the ibum, right? So answers the Gemara, Ma yekayem, yachzor v'yivol v'yekayem delo sag. You're right. Yekayem means you could stay married to her, but you have to do again a biyah in order to stay married to her because you can't just stay married to her like that. We're continuing with Lamed He Amud Bet. We are towards the bottom of 35b, right? We are on towards the bottom. Okay, so it says over here like this. It says like this. Yeah, 35b. Ika de'amni. There are those that say. Yeah, Ika de'amni. There are those that say. So he says, Eitvei Shakish Rabbi Yochanan. The Shakish comes and he asks Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so he asks the Shakish Rabbi Yochanan. Ima vlad shel kayama. If the vlad is going to be kayama, which means the vlad, the child is a viable child. Yeah, yekayim. So you keep them married to them. Right? Bishra melody, it's good according to me. That means that I'm going to say chalitza me'uberet lo shma chalitza uviat me'uberet lo shma bi'ah. That it's not going to be considered chalitza. It's not going to be considered bi'ah. Hainu diktani. That's why we said yikayem. What does that mean? Yachzor v'yivol v'yikayem. You have to do bi'ah again, and then you have to do yikayem. You could stay married to her. Telo sagi lavach. It's not enough without that. But according to you, ratza yotzi ratza yikayem bale. For you, you should have the choice. Why you should have the choice? If the Yavam wants, he could actually get rid of her. He could get rid of her with a get. And if he doesn't want, right, he could actually leave her as a wife. So, right? So that means, according to you, that it's going to be everything good, you should have a choice. According to me, you have to have relations again. And now you're going to have, whether it's going to be a good ibum or not a good ibum. But according to what you said, you should have the choice. You want to keep her, you want to get rid of her. So answers the Gemara, enachenami. You're right. He says, I did the Tani Reisha, since we taught in the Reisha Yotzi, which means you have to get rid of her, right? You have to take her out with a get. Tani Nema Seva, so to the Seva, he says, Yikayem, even though you have the choice. Yikayem means that you stay married to her, right? But really, you have the choice. If you want, you could stay married to her. If you want, you could actually divorce her, okay? Eighth we have the following question. Hakoneset ivim tov v'nimtzet me'uberet. Harezu lo tinaset tzarata shemayev la ben kayma. It says like this. What happens right now if a person did yibum to his yivama, and then he found out that she's pregnant? So the halacha says that the tzara, the co-wife, cannot get married until she gives birth. Why? Because maybe the vlad is going to be a ben kayama, which means even though yibum of one of the yivamot permits the co-wife to the marketplace, right? But if she was already pregnant, so then the tzara has to wait to find out. To find out for what? Says the Gemara, Adrabah, the opposite. Ki havi avla ben kayama, if the vlad is a good child, so mipatra tzarata. Why? Think about what's going on, right? A person comes and he does yibum, and all of a sudden she's pregnant. What do I have a doubt? Maybe the child is from the first brother. So the child is from the first brother. What should happen to the co-wife? For sure, she should get married to the shuk. So mimanashach, if it was from the second husband, meaning the brother, so then it was a yibum. Once the brother does yibum, the co-wife is permitted to the shuk, right? Yes, that's tzarot as a co-wife, right? Because that's it. Once one of them is done yibum too, the co-wife is exempt. Now, if it was from the first brother, also the co-wife, even better, because that means it came from the first brother. So what are we talking about? So says the Gemara, no, no. Not that you have to wait because maybe the child is not a viable child. So if the child was not a viable child, then you have to wait. So now says the Gemara, if you're going to tell me that the relations with a pregnant woman is considered a good biyah, and therefore was a good yibum, why can't she get married? What do I care now about the child? Yibum was done according to Rabbi Yochanan. So if yibum was done according to Rabbi Yochanan, the co-wife is exempt. She should go get married to whoever she wants. So says the Gemara, she should be exempt because of the other of her friend. So answers the Gemara, Abaye says, in relations, everybody agrees that does not exempt her co-wife, right, from the, meaning it's not considered the yibum over here. One is a machloket over here. That means basically the biyah is not going to poter the yevama from yibum, even according to Rabbi Yochanan. Okay? So he says, when is a machloket? A chalitza, by chalitza. Rabbi Yochanan savar chalitza meuberet shma chalitza, biyah meuberet lo shma biyah. Rabbi Yochanan says that chalitza meuberet is considered a good chalitza. That means even though she's pregnant and you did chalitza to her, it's considered a good chalitza. But biyat meuberet, but the yibum that you do to a meuberet is not considered a good yibum. Resh Lakish holds biyah meuberet lo shma biyah, chalitza meuberet lo shma chalitza. Resh Lakish says across the board, it's never good. The second that she's pregnant doesn't help, not biyah nor chalitza. Walo, it doesn't help. So Amale Rava comes and he says, Manavshach. I don't understand what's going on. If biyat meuberet is considered biyah, so chalitza meuberet shma chalitza. Biyah meuberet lo shma biyah, chalitza meuberet lo shma chalitza. Says Rava, I've got a question. We just changed Rabbi Yochanan. Remember, Rabbi Yochanan, we had across the board that it always helps, whether it's yibum or chalitza to meuberet, to the pregnant woman. And according to Resh Lakish, it never helps. Then we changed it. We said, no. Even according to Rabbi Yochanan, the chalitza is kasher, even though she was pregnant. And now we just have to find out it's pending on the child, if the child was a good child or if it was going to be a miscarriage, right? But the biyah is not. Says the Gemara, Rava comes, says manashach. It's either everything's good or everything's not good. Why? The Kaimelam was we paskin, lamed vav amud aleph on the top. Techol ole libum ole chalitza. She'en ole v'chol she'en ole libum and ole chalitza. Anything which helps the yibum, it helps chalitza, and if it doesn't help the yibum, it doesn't help the chalitza. So therefore, it cannot be that Rabbi Yochanan is mechalek between chalitza and yibum. It doesn't make sense. Okay, so the Gemara is going to answer. You're right. Elama Rava, but rather Rava says haki kamar. This is what it means to say. Hakonesi v'imtov v'nimtzeh meuberet azer lo zul lo tinaset tzarata. If a person gets married to his yevama and then she's found to be pregnant, so therefore you shouldn't get married to her tzara. Why? Shamiyev lad ben kayma, because maybe the child is going to be a good child. And the biyah is not considered a good biyah. The chalitza meuberet is also not considered a good chalitza. However, the child does not exempt until it comes out into the world. Meaning, until the child is born, it is not exempt from the yibum and the chalitza. So therefore, we have to wait to find out if it's going to be a good child. And that's what the Gemara is actually finishing off with.